As of right now, this election is still being contested. But when this is all said and done, the biggest interferer, the biggest influence, the biggest factor in the election will not be Russian interference or Chinese interference or Iranian interference. It'll be the major mainstream media interference. I mean, even after they officially declared the race for Joe Biden, they still kept going. Donald Trump is a racist, a fascist, a bigot.
Trump sits in the sweet spot of three things. He sits in the sweet spot of the intersection of racism or white supremacy, the intersection of greed and selfishness. And it's right there that he thrives.
Even though we intellectually understand what America is at its base, right? That there is a great amount of racism, anti-blackness, anti-wokeness, this idea that political correctness is some sort of scheme to destroy white America, right?
Oh my goodness, is it that bad?
Yeah.
I mean, no matter how many times the man denounced racists, fascists, Aryan brothers, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, it didn't make any difference.
How do you feel about the recent endorsement from David Duke?
I didn't even know he endorsed me. David Duke endorsed me? Okay. All right. I disavow, okay?
I totally disavow the Ku Klux Klan. I totally disavow David Duke. I've been doing it now for 2 weeks. You're probably about the 18th person that's asked me the question.
David Duke is a bad person who I disavowed on numerous occasions over the years.
If he said on Friday, I disavow, why ask him again on Saturday?
I'm saying to myself, how many times do I have to continue to disavow people? And the question was asked about David Duke and various groups.
When I put out that I reject KKK and David Duke, nobody picks it up. You know why they don't? Because they don't want to pick it up.
I disavowed him on Friday. I disavowed him right after that because I thought if there was any question, and you take a look at Twitter, almost immediately after on Twitter and Facebook, they were disavowed again. I disavowed him every time I speak to somebody virtually, and, they just keep it going. They keep it going.
I mean, Cheryl Atkinson, a reporter who used to work for CBS, says, look, reporters over and over again said, President Trump, denounce white supremacy. Denounce white supremacy. And when the man did, they didn't want to report about it. Specifically, she said the New York Times was guilty of this, demanded that Donald Trump renounce white supremacy, and then when he did...
For once, the New York Times actually put an honest headline about Trump that said he had, denounced racism or promoted unity. And the New York Times got so attacked by the mob, the leftist mob on Twitter. And again, these can sometimes just be a few people creating the appearance that there's a big mob, that the New York Times actually changed its headline. And we can see in that chapter about the New York Times that there was a later discussion at a staff meeting about, and a lot of headlines have been changed on the Times like this by the mob, sort of like news by popularity contest. And there were people who were arguing, well, they've been demanding Trump denounce racism. And by the way, I did a podcast on this the other day. He's done this since 2000 explicitly so many times, but the media always pretends he's never done it. But there's always demands for him to do it. And then when he explicitly does it, these New York Times staffers were arguing, well, we shouldn't report that he said it because he didn't mean it because we all know he's a racist. So on the one hand, they're demanding, this disavowal of racism and condemnation, which Trump has done repeatedly. But when he specifically does it and it makes a headline, they say, well, the New York Times, we should not grant him that because we're just, doing his bidding by reporting what he said. And they changed that headline to say something completely different. They went off on another narrative.
Now here's the con. Politicians like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, they know damn well that racism is no longer a major problem in American life. They know damn well that Donald Trump could not be elected if he were in fact a racist because America wouldn't tolerate it. I mean, even Chris Matthews admitted it. He says that when Donald Trump reaches out, he's doing so not just for blacks, but for whites. Because most white people would not vote for somebody if they thought he or she was a racist.
Mainly it's for white people, because white people won't vote for a guy, most of them, if they think they're racist.
And riddle me this, if Donald Trump is using a racist dog whistle, how come only white liberals seem to hear it? And in that last debate, when it was hosted by Kristen Welker of NBC, I just wish President Trump had said this out of the gate. Ms. Welker, thank you so much for having me. Now, before you ask me, I'm telling you one more time, I renounce white nationalism. Now, would you mind going down the hall and opening the door to your colleague Al Sharpton and ask him to renounce his racism and his anti-Semitism? After all, this is a man who became famous by falsely accusing a white man of raping a black teenager, of saying during the Crown Heights riots in 1991, if the Jews want to get it on, have them come over to my house and pin their yarmulkes on, and let's get it on. He referred to whites as diamond merchants, and Jews as diamond merchants, and whites as interlopers. Will you walk down the hall and renounce your colleague Al Sharpton, please? Can you imagine?
Damn!
Like I said, it's a con. By the way, Donald Trump got a higher percentage of the black vote than Mitt Romney did 4 years earlier. And right now, we're still looking at the exit polling, but it looks like Donald Trump at least increased his support for blacks by 50%, maybe even 100%. He increased his Latino support. He increased his support from Asians, for women. Now, if he has been sending a racist dog whistle, nobody seems to be hearing it. Now, how concerned really is the mainstream media about racism and racial insensitivity? Consider 2 years ago, the New York Times hired a woman named Sarah Jong to be a new member of the editorial board. But a few years earlier, Ms. Jong tweeted a few things that, in today's culture, you would think might be deemed to be, racially insensitive. Dumbass effing white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants, end of quote. Oh man, it's kind of sick how much joy I get out of being cruel to old white men, end of quote. I dare you to get on Wikipedia and play things white people can definitely take credit for. It's really hard, end of quote. Are white people genetically predisposed to burn faster in the sun, thus logically being only fit to live underground like groveling goblins, end of quote? Are you kidding me? And how did the New York Times explain away why they nevertheless hired her? Her journalism and the fact that she is a young Asian woman have made her a subject of frequent online harassment. For a period of time, she responded to that harassment by imitating the rhetoric of her harassers. She sees now that this approach only served to feed the vitriol that we too often see on social media. She regrets it, and the Times does not condone it, end of quote. Hey, young Asian privilege, right? Forget about me. Do you know who Van Gordon Sauter is? Van Gordon Sauter is a longtime former head of CBS News. Even he is admitting that the media has gone absolutely insane when it comes to Donald Trump. They are so biased, it is glaringly obvious, he says. Not me, Van Gordon Sauter, the former head of CBS News. News organizations that claim to be neutral have long been creeping leftward, and their loathing of Mr. Trump has accelerated the pace. The news media is catching up with the liberalism of the professorate, the entertainment industry, upscale magazines, and the literary world. To many journalists, objectivity, balance, and fairness, once the gold standard of reporting, are not mandatory in a divided political era and in a country they believe is severely flawed. To the journalists, including more than a few Republicans, Trump is a blatant vulgarian, an incessant prevaricator, and a dangerous leader who should be ousted next January, if not sooner. Much of journalism has become the clarion voice of the resistance, dedicated to ousting the president, even though he was legally elected and enjoys the support of about 44% of likely 2020 voters. The media seems uninterested in these issues of bias. He writes, the news media seems very comfortable with its product and ability to sell it. There's probably no way to seal the gap between the media and a large segment of the public. The media likes what it's doing, admires it, celebrates it. There's no personal, professional, or financial reason to change. If anything, the gap will expand. Ultimately, the media finds the deplorables deplorable. End of quote. His solution? Admit it. Admit their bias. Admit we are left-wing. That way the viewer and the reader can determine whether or not he or she believes in the integrity of the reporting. Just admit it. More from the mouths of the media babes themselves, Ken Stern was the CEO of NPR. When he resigned, here's what he said about his own organization. Most reporters and editors are liberal. A Pew Research poll found that liberals outnumber conservatives in the media by some 5-1, and that comports with my own anecdotal experience at National Public Radio. Well, that's pretty obvious, but then he goes into detail. When you are liberal and everyone else around you is as well, it is easy to fall into groupthink on what stories are important, what sources are legitimate, and what the narrative of the day will be. This may seem like an unusual admission from someone who once ran NPR. Spurred by a fear that red and blue America were drifting irrevocably apart, I decided to venture out from my overwhelmingly Democratic neighborhood and engage. So the man left the comforts of his left-wing studio, left-wing organization, and actually went out to America and found out that there were normal people who weren't liberal. For an entire year, I embedded myself with the other side, sitting in a pit row at a NASCAR race, hanging out at Tea Party meetings, and sitting in on Steve Bannon's radio show. I found an America far different from the one depicted in the press and imagined by presidents, clinging to guns or religion, and presidential candidates, basket of deplorables alike. So he ventured out and discovered a whole different world. You know, that sounds like a premise for a sitcom, only in reverse.
Well, the first thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire.
Mr. Stern discovered gas. Republicans were normal. I spent many Sundays in evangelical churches and hung out with 15,000 evangelical youth at the Urbana Conference. I wasn't sure what to expect among thousands of college-age evangelicals, but I certainly didn't expect the intense discussion of racial equity and refugee issues, how to help them, not how to keep them out. But that is what I got, end of quote. I mean, the man discovered that conservatives didn't eat their youth. I met dozens of people who are dedicating their lives to the mission, spreading the good word of Jesus, of course, but doing so through a life of charity and compassion for others, staffing remote hospitals, building homes for the homeless. I mean, the man even went hunting in Texas with Texans. None of my new hunting partners fit the lazy caricature of the angry NRA member. Rather, they saw guns as both a shared sport and as a necessary means to protect their families during uncertain times. I mean, Mr. Stern found out that he liked Republicans, even empathized with them. I also spent time in depressed areas of Kentucky and Ohio with workers who felt that their concerns had long fallen on deaf ears. I drank late into the night at the Royal Oaks Bar in Youngstown and met workers who had been out of the mills for almost 2 decades and had suffered the interlocking plagues of unemployment, opioid addiction, and declining health. To a man, and sometimes a woman, they looked at media and saw stories that did not reflect the world that they knew or the fears that they had. Bottom line, according to Mr. Stern, it's not that the media is suppressing the stories intentionally, it's that these stories don't reflect their beliefs or interests. End of quote. More from the media themselves about the 2008 race between Barack Obama and John McCain. The Washington Post has an ombudsperson at the time. Her name was Deborah Howell. Her job is to make sure the paper is doing right by its readers. She admitted when the race was over that her paper was biased in favor of Barack Obama and against John McCain. The op-ed page ran far more laudatory opinion pieces on Obama, 32, than on Senator John McCain, 13. There were far more negative pieces about McCain than there were about Obama, and Obama got the editorial board's endorsement. Stories and photos about Obama outnumbered those devoted to McCain. Reporters, photographers, and editors found the candidacy of Obama, the first African-American major party nominee, more newsworthy and historic. Some readers thought the Post went over Sarah Palin with a fine-tooth comb and neglected Joe Biden. They are right, end of quote. And the New York Times then ombudsperson admitted the same thing. Arthur Brisbane said, quote, across the paper's many departments, so many share a kind of political and cultural progressivism. for lack of a better term. This worldview virtually bleeds through the fabric of the times, end of quote. Finally, suppose media bias did not exist. My friend Tim Grosclose, a professor of political science and economics, wrote a book called Left Turn, where he tried to quantify the effect of the liberal bias on how people think and how people vote. Here's what he found. For the past several years, I have researched this question. If media bias were to disappear, according to the analysis, then America would think and vote like any region that voted around 56 to 43% for Republican John McCain versus Barack Obama in the last presidential election. Wow. Texas. The average state would vote like Texas, but for media bias, 13 points in favor of the Republican. This is the effect of our left-wing mainstream media. Now, as of right now, Donald Trump is contesting this election. If he prevails, it won't be the first time he's been underestimated, but it'll be the last time.
Harmon will probably try to squib it, and he does. Ball comes loose, and the Bears have to get out of bounds. Rodgers along the sideline, another one. They're still in deep trouble at midfield. They tried to do a couple of... The ball is still loose as they get it to Rodgers. They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. He's going into the end. The Bears! The Bears have won! The Bears have won! Oh, my God! The most amazing, sensational, dramatic, heart-rending, exciting, thrilling finish in the history of college football.
So don't count the man out. And if he loses, I would not rule out 2024. I'm Larry Elder, and we've got a country to save. I'll see you next time.